After what was a fairly clunky start to the season for Melbourne against the Tigers, their opening 20 minutes against Souths was a lot better and a lot more scary for fans of other teams. And, I'm not going to look too much at their first try because that was just kind of beautiful rugby league. It was fantastic from Harry Grant to put the kick across, and he saw the space for Xavier Coates to exploit. And there's not too much there to analyse other than the very cliche line of playing eyes-up footy. Melbourne are actually one of the better teams at doing that, which is a big departure from the way they used to play when Cooper Cameron Smith and Billy Slater ruled the roost there. And they did have to adapt a bit. They couldn't be quite as structured or reliant on their set plays. They had to try and find new ways to break down opposition defences. And having players like Harry Grant, Cameron Munster, Jerome Hughes and Ryan Pappenhausen has allowed them to be seemingly more creative. And it's probably no coincidence that Munster, Hughes and Pappenhausen, well, they've all played fullback in the NRL, so their ability to count numbers and exploit gaps in the defensive line is almost intrinsic to the way they play. And Harry Grant's just kind of the cherry on top there. He's an unbelievable hooker, and he's so quickly gone to basically the top level, and he's still relatively inexperienced. He hasn't played a lot of football. He hasn't played a lot of consistent football due to injury, but he could quite seriously be in contention for the Kangaroo squad at the end of this year. Anyway, enough about that. Let's get into actually looking at how Melbourne broke down South's defensive structure early in the match with their second try, which was to Ryan Pappenhausen. Let's just start with where they start this set, and it's kind of in the middle of the field. They're in the middle tram track there, which is after Lachlan Ilias has punted the ball out on the full. So obviously, if you're Souths, you're not really wanting to give Melbourne that kind of field position or ability to play at you. You want to be burying them in their own half and forcing them to come off their own line, as you do with most teams, but Melbourne more especially so. You don't want to be giving them very cheap field position. And Melbourne scored this try on the right-hand side of the field, which for them, they scored 34% of their tries on the right side last year, and they scored 38% down their left. Now, South scored 29% of their tries down the right and 55% down their left. Their left side was immense last year, and as a Parramatta fan, we're still having nightmares over that. So, as I said, the set starts in the middle of the field after Ilias puts the ball out in the full, and as we can see there, right, so we've got a tackle first. First tackle is Trent Loiero hitting the ball up. Not much there, it's just a settler, it's just getting them some field position and allowing their shape to take place. Then we see Munster go to first receiver, which is pretty regular for Melbourne. He might be 5'8", but he does play a lot of first receiver. And what we end up with here is very quickly an overlap developing. So there are 5 players for Melbourne on their right edge. You got Jerome Hughes, Felice Kafusi, Ryan Pappenhausen, and then their centre and winger are off screen. You'll see them pop up later. And for South, they got a defence of 4 players there, beginning 4 in, then you've got 3 in, and then you get your centre and your winger. This isn't ideal, and we're going to get to how the ball ends up there in the first place. But starting out 30 metres from your own try line and you have a 5-on-4 is already alarm bells here. So Pappenhausen gets the ball on the outside of Cody Walker, which is a big problem because Walker's kind of fast, but Ryan Pappenhausen's like lightning. You don't want to be giving him too much space. The pass goes to Munster, and he goes nice and early to Jerome Hughes. And the beauty of this pass is, boom, Hughes is on the outside shoulder of his defender. And when you're defending the way that Souths do, particularly like most teams do, if your opponent is on the outside of your shoulder, you've got a problem because you have to push harder from the inside to close him down. And if you give him too much time and space, your outside defenders are going to panic and they're going to come in. And that's going to then open up a bigger overlap. So Walker becomes passive because he's realised that Hughes is on his outside shoulder. He's not going to be able to come up and close down the play. So because Walker becomes passive, he gets suckered in to trying to stop Felice Kafusi, who is just a decoy runner, but Kafusi runs a pretty hard and straight line and forces Walker to pay attention to him, which then leaves Ryan Pappenhausen looming out the back. And unfortunately for South, their outside men are now outnumbered. From there, it's just simple pass selection by Pappenhausen. Coates comes into frame and he's got a lot of room, so it's pretty simple. Give Coates the ball, he's too fast, he's going to either score himself or he's going to put Pappenhausen back in on the inside, which is what ends up happening. Ball goes out to Coates, Coates outside Johnston, foots it down the right touch line, Mitchell comes across in defence, but Pappenhausen, like all good fullbacks, supporting on the inside, collects the ball, scores in the right corner. The move is slick, and it's kind of what you would expect from Melbourne. and their fast ball movement, their ability to get outside their opponent's defensive structure. But South's defensive capabilities here are a bit questionable. And this actually occurred during the broadcast. Cameron Smith and Andrew Johns are both commenting on this. The fact that Alex Johnston is horrendously far in field. He's 15 metres in from touch. He's still, surprisingly, on the outside of Xavier Coates at the start of this play. But look at the depth that Melbourne are playing with. They're playing where Ryan Pappenhausen is. He's more than 10 metres behind the ball, which means they've got plenty of time to exploit the room on the edges. Souths are playing almost a bastardised version of the umbrella defence under Warren Ryan, but it's a lot more passive, it's not aggressive, and Melbourne exploit this with their quick ball movement to their edges. And the issue for South is they only conceded 29% of their tries on their left edge last season. They conceded 45% of their tries on their right edge. So their left edge is supposed to be the better defensive unit. Melbourne are too good and they're too slick and they do this too easily. But let's just go back to what actually happened and why Cameron Munster was able to do what he did. And he didn't. It's nothing particularly complex what happens here. He's there, as you can see, he's at first receiver, he's directing traffic, he's got Jerome Hughes standing directly behind him, basically. He's got an inside ball option there. I believe that's King, who's going to attract the attention of Tom Burgess, and Munster himself is going to attract the attention of Damien Cook. But he gets the ball, he drifts slightly, and then pops the ball to Jerome Hughes, and this is where the problem starts. As I said, Cody Walker is now essentially left with worrying about three players. He's worried Jerome Hughes is going to get to the outside of his defender. He's worried about Felice Kafusi, who's right in front of him, and he's going to be a hell of a difficult problem to bring down. And of course, Ryan Pappenhausen is looping out the back. And Jerome Hughes does what all good halves do. He knows he's threatening player. He knows he's threatening teammate. He's out the back. Get the ball to Pappenhausen, let him do his thing, and there you go. Melbourne are in the corner and it looks too easy. Now let's look what happens when your right edge isn't quite working the way it should be. So in the 60th minute, South still haven't scored a point. And they've been trying to, but it's been incredibly clunky. Their left edge, which was deadly last year, has just been throwing the ball into touch, dropping it, running into each other, and their right edge has been nowhere near even as good as that. It's been honestly pathetic. So here they go, right edge, last tackle. Now, first of all, they've got an overlap here. There are 4 players on the screen here that are outnumbering the 3 defenders. They have a 5th that's off screen, which you've got a 5-on-3. Melbourne exploited that in the first half and scored. So you'd expect Souths here to be able to exploit their 5-on-3 numbers and send someone over in the right corner. So we've got Damien Cook coming out of dummy half. He's getting pressured from the inside by, I believe that's Nelson Asofa-Solomona. He's got Lachlan Ilias at first receiver. And then he's got Latrell Mitchell sitting out the back. Now, the thing I'm going to point out here is where Campbell Graham is standing. He's playing number 4 in the red. He's in front of Latrell Mitchell. That's a problem, because when the ball goes to Mitchell, he's going to be wanting to pass it to Graham. If Graham's in front of him, obviously he can't give him the ball. But not only that, it means Mitchell can't then threaten the outside defenders for Melbourne, because he has to then run behind Graham. And in today's day and age, you run behind your teammate in an attacking position, you're going to get pinged for a shepherd. So as we see in the actual play, Mitchell gets the ball and he's literally got nowhere to go. He's going to have to stop, and Graham has to stop his run. So the pair of them basically stop in the middle, on the right edge there, and Graham has to wait for Mitchell to come in front of him. Mitchell pops Graham the ball, Graham juggles it, and because they've had to stop, Melbourne's rushing inside defence comes across and very easily accounts for Campbell Graham, and they just put him into the turf, tackle 5, handover. It's exactly what you're not supposed to do. Mitchell ends up with no room, Campbell Graham stops, everything breaks down. Storm defence is good. They're one of the best in the scramble defence and sending players across field to close down plays. But when you have a 5-on-3, the Souths of last year probably score that pretty comfortably. They went from an overlap to the defence having a 4-on-2 advantage. But eventually, Souths did click into gear, and in their final 15 minutes, they of course managed to send the game to extra time. And they started all that with a try to Alex Johnston in the 69th minute. So you've obviously got Damien Cook here at dummy half. Now, Cameron Murray is standing at first receiver, which is obviously different to the way that Melbourne played when they scored their second try. Cameron Munster, ball player, first receiver, but here Souths have opted for Cam Murray. And Murray's one of the best middle ball distributors in the competition. As a lock, he's got a good enough middle passing game to essentially play the role of first receiver. So he gets the ball here, and Look, the ball he passes to Cody Walker isn't fantastic, but the shape Souths are running, they've compressed the Melbourne defence, and they've already got a 4-on-3 overlap. Jerome Hughes is in no man's land, Remus Smith is in no man's land, and pretty soon Xavier Coates is going to be in no man's land. Murray actually does a really good job of engaging essentially 2.5 defenders. You've got Kafusi has to bite on him, and his teammate on his right shoulder is then held up by Mark Nichols, as is Jerome Hughes. So you've basically taken definitely 2 defenders, and Hughes is half turned in, so he's going to have to turn out, and he's given away his outside shoulder to South's left edge. And as the play develops, you've got Remus Smith and Xavier Coates both come up and in, as they've been doing all night. South had run this play at least half a dozen times, and almost every time Remus Smith and Xavier Coates had come up and in. But Coates had done this weird jumping action, which seemed to put Cody Walker off, and he wasn't passing the ball correctly, or there was some miscommunication. And there's still miscommunication in this segment here from South. Cody Walker gets not the perfect ball from Cam Murray and has to juggle it himself, but he's got 3 options here. He's got the flat ball that he can pass centre forward straight through the gap that's opened up. He's got Tane Milne out the back, or he could throw the long cutout ball and hit Alex Johnston. It's fairly low risk at this point because of where Xavier Coates is positioned. He's not anywhere near far enough into South's attacking line to really threaten an intercept, regardless of how tall or how fast he is. And of course, as this play goes on, Cody Walker goes to his left edge. He goes to throw the long ball to Alex Johnston. Tane Milne almost destroys this entire play and blows up a chance at actually getting Souths on the board, but his little juggle ends up coming off, and Alex Johnston ends up being the beneficiary in the left corner, going over untouched. And South did a pretty good job here of exploiting their numbers and exploiting Melbourne's up and in defence. And Melbourne, they're a bit of an interesting team to watch defend. They're not always up and in, they're not always up and sliding, but quite often their wingers tend to jam in quite early in plays. It seems to be something to do with the fact they usually have quite fast wingers. Josh Adokar did it a lot last year. Interestingly, last year, Storm conceded 45% of their tries down that right edge. So there's no surprise South kept going to their very threatening left edge. As I mentioned earlier, that they scored a huge number of their tries, 55% of them down their left edge, so it's their most productive side of the field. Overall, Melbourne and South, it was a clunky game to watch, and we were kind of treated to the fact that it ended up going to extra time when it could quite easily have been just another blowout, with the Storm running roughshod over the Rabbitohs had the first 20 minutes continued. There's no doubt been some issues with South and their spine. Obviously, losing Adam Reynolds means they've lost their main playmaker, their shot caller, and it showed really in Lachlan Ilias struggling to really take over. And that's not really a massive problem for Ilias as such. I'm not trying to hammer the poor kid. He's only played, I think, 3 or 4 NRL games. Adam Reynolds wasn't that good 3 or 4 NRL games, so it's going to take him some time to get used to it, but it also shows maybe it was the wrong idea to ship Reynolds up to Brisbane. So I'm expecting South to slowly get better. As they showed, they're not that far away. They were really just missing that last pass. It wasn't that they were completely and utterly disorganised, but it was just that little bit of crispness, that little bit of speed that they had last year they don't quite have at the moment this year. And it could also be because Latrell Mitchell didn't play last week, and they've had Blake Taaffe out as well, who kind of played the Mitchell role towards the end of last year. They do have a bit of work to do there on their spine. But for Melbourne, they're 2 from 2, but they're far from their best. They were very clunky against the Tigers. Here, they were excellent for probably the opening 20-30 minutes, and for the remainder of the game, weren't quite as good as they should have been. And as we could see, regularly going to the coach's box, Craig Bellamy wasn't a fan of that. He went for plenty of walks throughout the game. It'll be an interesting clash next week when South played the Roosters. Roosters, of course, ended up with a win over Manly, but they didn't quite put Manly away when they had chances to on Friday night. So it could really be a case of whoever kind of turns up for the full 80 minutes, which is a very rugby league cliche, but at the moment, neither of these sides have really put together a really comprehensive 80-minute performance. Both sides look clunky, but the Roosters did look a little more threatening throughout the game than South did against Melbourne. Meanwhile, for Melbourne, they're playing Parramatta, so we're going to get a good sense of where Parramatta and Melbourne are. Don't forget, the Eels beat Melbourne both times they played last season, and Melbourne were full strength for most of those. So it's going to be a very interesting game between those two sides. I am recording this before Parramatta play Cronulla, so either I could be very right and Parramatta could be in a very good vein of form, or they could be carrying their second half and chunks of their Titans form over to next week. But really, this game showed why Melbourne have been as good as they are for as long as they are, when they have the opportunity to put on shape, they're excellent. We did get a bit of an example of what happens when you lose your chief playmaker and some of the issues that can come up, which kind of get borne out very clearly on the field. But it's also a demonstration of how well NRL teams organise their attack and how in sync everyone needs to be in order to actually score in the NRL. A little bit off here or there, you end up dropping the ball, you throw the ball behind a player, or you just flat out miscommunicate with each other and run into each other. So I'm sure Souths will end up a lot better as the season goes on, and that their combinations combine. And Melbourne, well, I'm expecting them to just get better and better as they warm into the season. It tends to be the first 3 to 4 weeks. It takes teams like this to just kind of click into gear, get used to playing with each other again, and then away you go. So if you enjoyed this video, don't forget like and subscribe. Let me know if you want me to have a look at anything else throughout the rounds, throughout the year, whether that's on Wednesday when I do my analysis shows and you get a bit more of a look at how certain players or certain teams or certain coaches operate, or if you see something during a weekend's match and you want that broken down, you can just drop them in the comments, let me know, and I'll do my best to have a look and try and analyse them for you. So I will see you guys next Monday for Monday Halfback, and don't forget Wednesday there will be the analysis show. I will see you then, and this week we have a look at Craig Bellamy's unbelievable coaching records as he brought up 500 games in the NRL against South Sydney.